a preaching series looking at particular words within Christianity that are important to our tradition and our theology. And the words that we're looking at today are righteous and righteousness and justice. And even though it doesn't really appear in our reading in the New Revised Standard Version that most of us are familiar with and maybe use at home, righteousness does appear within this text. And really, when you step back and look at the whole Bible, righteous appears hundreds of times throughout the New Testament and throughout Hebrew Scripture. So what does it mean? Really, the focus verse for our New Testament reading, at least in the New Revised Standard Version, reads, "Your righteousness must exceed that of the Pharisees for you to enter the kingdom of heaven." Here in this translation that we use within worship, it's rendered, you must obey the rules better than the Pharisees in order to get into heaven. And really, if you look at the whole context of this little sort of story that Jesus is saying out, this little sort of kernel of wisdom, it seems to be all about obeying rules. Because law, or Torah, is mentioned, which is a huge series of commandments within the body of Jewish literature that the Pharisees kept. And so looking at this text, one would sort of assume that what Jesus is saying is you have to be better Pharisees than the Pharisees are. And as we look at the New Testament and look at its criticism of the Pharisees, we kind of get a bit of a negative reaction there, because the New Testament is really very open in its criticism of how the Pharisees lived their lives. They were a very exclusive bunch. They were very rule conscious. They were very conscious about imposing their rules on other people. And if you didn't obey their rules, they excluded you from their fellowship altogether. So righteous and righteousness within that kind of context, it really has a very negative connotation to us. And even when we come to our own society and our own culture today, when we put the word self in front of righteous, we don't exactly get a picture of a wonderful person. Really, instead, we get a picture of a person that we hold up to ridicule because, again, they hold themselves up to be above everybody else. Is Jesus really asking us to be more Pharisaic than the Pharisees? Let's do a reality check. And you don't have to read the Gospels very far to find that there are significant religious criticisms of Jesus as a rule breaker. He is constantly accused of breaking the Sabbath laws to heal people or to cast out evil spirits or heal demented people. He is constantly accused of breaking the kosher laws. He is constantly accused of breaking the laws of association, consorting with sinners and tax collectors and other people who might be outside of the circle drawn by the Pharisees. And we have to ask the question, is Jesus saying, do what I say, but don't do what I do? Is that how we're going to reconcile what this text is really talking about? I think we need to take a step backwards and kind of look at the use of righteous and righteousness, maybe just within the New Testament. And when we do that, we find that there are two very large concentrations of the usage of this word. One is in Matthew, and the other is in Paul's writings, and specifically in Paul's letter to the Romans. And when we look at those two places, and we find commonalities, we understand that both the Gospel of Matthew and Paul, as he is writing in particular to the church in Rome, are trying to get across the notion that Christianity is the best fulfillment of all the deepest yearnings of Judaism. And that Christianity's ideas and Christianity's formation draw out of the root of Judaism. And if that's the case, then maybe we need to go back to Hebrew Scripture and find out what righteous means there. And when we go there, it's all over the place. God is described as righteous. People are described as righteous. And there, the word righteous is a very positive thing. Really, it translates into doing the right thing. And so when Hebrew Scripture talks of God as righteous, it really speaks of God acting in ways that do the right thing. And when the Bible talks about a person who is righteous, the Bible is talking about a person who is constantly conscious of doing the right thing. Now that may sound like, again, it's kind of rules-based as we go back to Matthew and look at the context in which Jesus was talking about, but really it goes beyond that. If you look at the kind of people that are described as being righteous in Hebrew Scripture, they're not people who follow the letter of the law to its nth degree. They are people who have so internalized the teachings of God and God's commandments that they actually live beyond them. That they go to where the spirit of all these commandments are trying to reach. These are people who are not what we would call self-righteous. They're not prigs. They don't set themselves up above anybody else. They are people you can count on. They are people who provide safe space. They are people that you can trust implicitly. As the psalmist says at the very beginning of the Psalter, these people are like trees planted by water that bring stability, give shelter, and bring coolness and refreshment. And you don't have to read in Hebrew Scripture again very far to see where the word righteous or righteousness occurs, to see that it is often paired by the word justice. Constantly in the Psalms, righteousness and justice kiss each other. In our reading this morning from Amos, let justice flow down like waters and righteousness like an ever-flowing stream. This is Hebrew poetry, a parallelism of saying the same thing using slightly different language over and again, once and then say it again. It means in Hebrew consciousness very much the same thing. And when you get to understand that, the real differentiation in Hebrew Scripture between righteousness and justice is a matter of plurality. A person who does the right thing is a righteous person. A community that does the right thing is a community that acts with justice. And, a funny thing happened on the way to the Agora. I mentioned last week about the Septuagint, which is the Greek translation of Hebrew Scripture, that really acts as a bridge between this older Hebraic Semitic body of literature and the New Testament, which is written in Hellenistic times, in Hellenistic Judaism, and how concepts get translated from the Hebrew into Greek and then over into the New Testament. And when you look at the Septuagint, both righteousness, which is tzedek in Hebrew, and justice, which is mishpat in Hebrew, get translated into one word in Greek, dikaios. And that's the word that gets translated into the New Testament. And so when we come back and we look at Matthew and we see the righteousness occur in our English translations, actually there are a number of alternatives. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, they shall be filled. That's what we're used to reading. But with the knowledge of what's going on in the Greek, it could very easily also be translated, blessed are those who hunger and thirst for justice, they shall be filled. And when you understand that this word dikaios is trying to marry the two concepts, and we know that righteousness and justice means to do the right thing, we can also translate, blessed are those who hunger and thirst to do the right thing. They shall be filled. And when you go fast forward in the Sermon on the Mount to our text for this morning, specifically with the Pharisees, it can be translated, your righteousness must exceed that of the Pharisees. Your justice must exceed that of the Pharisees. Your pursuit of doing the right thing must exceed that of the Pharisees. And all of a sudden, with that translation, we begin to get a shift in how we understand this text. It is not so much about following the rules, being the more superior Christian, being the one who has the perfect checklist and an A grade for the Christian life of discipleship. It is about living with the consciousness of doing right that goes beyond just the rules. So what is right? You know, even though Mishpat and Tzedek in Hebrew are two very different words, and they get translated into the one word in Greek, dikaios. Greek is actually a very nuanced and complex language. Dikaios is not the only choice to translate justice or righteousness. There are plenty of other words in Greek to do that as well. Why this one? And when you do the etymology and dig deeply within the structure and history of the Greek language itself, the word dikaios has a very interesting root meaning. It means to set free.
That's amazing.
The person who does the right thing is the person who gives their life over to setting others free. And now when we come back and look at this text where Jesus is talking about the Christian life in comparison to the Pharisees, he's not saying you've got to be better Pharisees than the Pharisees. He's saying you've got to go beyond them, and what your mission in life is to set people free. And then when we go back and look at Jesus, the rule breaker, we understand why he's breaking those rules. And when he breaks the Sabbath laws and heals and casts out evil spirits on the Sabbath, he explicitly in many occasions says, why? To set people free. Is not the Sabbath a day of freedom? And is this not an appropriate day to heal people that they may be free? And when he breaks the kosher laws, eating grain in the fields, and the Pharisees are going tut, tut, tut because they're not washing their hands. Well, in reality, to go and wash their hands, they have to go to the village, get to the purification cisterns, go through the ritual, go back out in the fields, and by the time they're back out in the fields, they're unclean again. Might as well just eat. These people are starving, and to make them go through these nonsensical rules that they continue to starve, free them. Let them eat. And for the association laws, those people who are drawn outside of the circle of Jesus breaks those so that they can be free to be included within the blessed community. I wonder, what would our mission begin to look like as a congregation if we understood ourselves to be people of righteousness and justice with the understanding that this means to set people free? When we engage in our food security programs, with Meals on Wheels or with the food pantry, what are we doing? We are setting people free from hunger, that they may then have the opportunity to address the underlying issues in their lives that are causing their hunger. And when we offer people access to education, what are we doing? We are offering them a freedom from ignorance and the possibility to get skills to be able to participate fully and contribute and benefit from our wider economy. And when we engage in ministries of reconciliation, we are freeing people from prejudice so that those who have been pushed outside may become people of the inside, people of the blessed community, and be treated with decency and humanity. We set people free. And if you look again at Matthew and you look again at Paul and his writing to the Romans, there is a story that undergirds both of these books of the Bible. And it is the Exodus. And you remember that story. You remember that story from the old song you learned maybe in vacation Bible school or in Sunday school. What does it go? Go down, Moses. Go down, way down to Egypt's land. Tell old Pharaoh what? Set my people free as one. Let my people go. Let me hear it. Let me hear it. That's righteousness.
Please be seated.